Hey everyone, I hope that you're doing well and that you're staying cool from all of this heat. First, let me apologize. I usually mean to have all of the scoring and the feedback for blog posts done like the next day after they're due. So Sunday was what I was shooting for, and that just didn't happen this time around. So my apologies for being just a little bit late. I have provided feedback and scores in the gradebook for your blog posts. Please let me know if you have any questions about that. I think most everyone was able to get their blog posts to publish on our class Medium publication. So I think we're probably okay there, but if that's not true, let me know and I'm happy to help. As we are now moving to modules 4 and 5 this week, we are going to get into the even more messy portion of the revolution. And as many of you pointed out in your post from last week, the early stages of the revolution, I should say, really set the stage for the chaos and the violence that came thereafter. And so that's something to think about as we examine the constitutionalist movement. So Venustiano Carranza, of course, is the first chief of the constitutionalist movement, or of the revolution as he declares himself. And he has supporters in figures like Álvaro Obregón from Sonora, Plutarco Elias Calles, who is also a Sonoran, who also is allied with Obregón. And he has the loose, a loose alliance with Pancho Villa. Pancho Villa ends up having a stronghold in Chihuahua, and is one of the more famous of the quote-unquote peasant revolutionary leaders. And so we'll kind of look at the reasons that the alliance between those folks in the constitutionalist movement was never that strong to begin with, and how it eroded. You'll notice I didn't yet mention Emiliano Zapata. In the south in Morelos, he ends up allying pretty loosely with Villa at the end of 1914 into 1915, but the Zapatistas were always kind of doing their own thing. Zapata is considered kind of one of the most ideologically pure of the revolutionary leaders because his goal was always the same. It never changed. He couldn't be bought off by Madero. He wanted to have the restoration of land to his people in Morelos, and that was really the only plank that he had. That's oversimplifying a little bit, but not terribly. And that's one of the reasons that he never became a national figure or a national leader, even to the extent that Pancho Villa did. So again, some things to think about as we continue forward. A couple of, or something I wanted to point out, or at least draw your attention back to, is that question of the Mexican Revolution as the 20th century's first social revolution. And what does that mean? And I think all of the blog posts that I just read and your ideas thinking about Madero and how he was unable to balance the interests of those who had supported him in achieving the ouster of Porfirio Diaz and then becoming a democratically elected president. Madero did not end up supporting the needs and the visions of those folks. We're talking about people like Pascual Orozco, people like Emiliano Zapata. Interestingly, Villa remained loyal to Madero through it all. He was kind of intensely, I almost said insanely, that was the first word that came to my mind, and it might not be wrong. He's just very tenaciously loyal to Francisco Madero and to people that he feels have his best interests in mind. So that's something to think about as we move forward as well. But then going back to this notion of social revolution, that was not ever Madero's goal, right? Madero wanted to have some limited democratic reforms that would bring the kind of middle and upper middle class hacendados like himself, entrepreneurs, people who had created new businesses like the beer business in Nuevo León, for example, things like this, educated folks. That's actually where figures in the PLM came from, including Ricardo Flores Magón, although Magón moved further to the left. and never considered Madero much of a leader. But, again, most of those folks were thinking about democracy in a very limited way that did not include the peasants, it didn't include the campesinos, it didn't include the workers, even if they thought that by giving a bit more power to a wider swath of the educated populace of Mexico would bring better things for the poorer folks. Again, they had sort of a benevolent, paternalistic view of the Mexican people. That wasn't enough. By the time that the revolution had been unleashed, that was no longer enough. That was not something that was going to change. So it's interesting to think about, how do we go from here to a point in 1917 when a very progressive constitution is enacted that brings into account many of the ideas that the PLM had in their party platform. That's I think the first document we read in the Wasserman book. How do those things that are social reforms, changes, many of them revolutionary, how are those brought in to the Constitution, and why by that point, when what we've started with is something that's not seeming to support those ideals? So I'm sorry I rambled a little bit. I got a couple of texts that came in and threw my concentration, so apologize for that, but I think I got the point across, so that we're thinking about that question of social revolution as we move forward. If you've continued with me thus far, I'm going to post a couple of photos from the Archivo General de la Nación, the AGN in Mexico City. I was fortunate to visit there about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. And if you know anything about the AGN, you know that it used to be the Lecumberri prison. So it was the place that Madero, at least for a time, was imprisoned. So was Pancho Villa, and many other political prisoners, even up through the 1960s, before it became the National Archive in the 1980s. So it's a really interesting place to visit, especially for a historian, because it's archives and it's actually this major historical landmark. And so I saw the kind of marker and monument where on the other side of the wall, that was where Madero and his vice president, Pino Suarez, were assassinated. And so I'll share some of that along with this video and this announcement. So again, I'll get better probably at not being quite so rambly, but I appreciate your time and your effort, and I appreciate all of your ideas as we're learning together and thinking about the revolution.